let's get started. As we say, I'm sure it will take us off script after about 2 questions,
Mhm.
but a nice, easy one to start with, Todd. It's always good just to kind of get the ball rolling with a bit of an intro. So I'm sure you've done it many times before, but just a sort of brief introduction to yourself. I guess particularly with regards to your experience within the sector, obviously, but also how that's kind of influenced your approach to your current work at Rapid7, and if there's any kind of key messages you've taken through your career to influence your current work.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Tod Beardsley. I've been at Rapid7 for 10 years and change, which is stupendously long tech. That's like 4 jobs worth of job. And I started at Rapid7 10 years ago as part of the Metasploit crew. So when Rapid7 acquired Metasploit, it was and is an open source project. That was pretty much the de facto standard, as far as I could tell, for like penetration testers.
Okay.
It was the Swiss Army knife of exploits and proof of concept code and payloads and evasion techniques and like basically all the things that a penetration tester would need. And I helped work on that. I was already an open source contributor to that. I worked with H.T. Moore, who was like, he's the marquee name on Metasploit. I worked with him for real at a real job. At the time, we were both at Breaking Point, which was a network testing company. And then he negotiated this thing with Rapid7. They somehow acquired an open source project. I don't even know how that even works, because it's still open source. It's 2-clause BSD, which means, I don't know how nerdy you get about open source licensing, but 2-clause BSD is the best open source license. It's the one that says like you can literally do whatever you want. You can sell it. You can do what we are arming up competitors, right? And people do, like other legit competitors of Rapid7 use Metasploit like routinely. And so anyway, I was working on that project. I came over when it became clear that Rapid7 wasn't going to destroy Metasploit. This was a big question mark at the time. And they continue to not destroy Metasploit, so I continue to work here.
Cool.
And it's super fun. And so like I had before that, like I did have this background of, I did red teaming and penetration testing. I did auditing. I did some bug hunting. I did a bunch in patch management. I used to work at Dell and Westinghouse, so like big Windows shop footprint things. And patch management was nightmarish then. Kids these days, like they have it easy. Like I had change of control review boards to deal with and all that. So I feel like that background in IT, like in IT ops, really did inform like a lot of, kind of like security common sense for me.
Sure.
It's a sense that I sometimes don't get from folks that are like, go to school for cybersecurity and get the degree and get the CISSP and then go work in cybersecurity. Like they've never actually, run a mail server and like dealt with that. So there is a little bit of like kids these days about that and, kind of school of hard knocks in there. And there are other avenues to this career, right? Like you can absolutely be like a data scientist and like have great things to say about security. Like I work with one here at Rapid7.
Sure.
Quan Lin is amazing. He's at Quantitative on Twitter, KW Quantitative. It's pretty funny. But he's really great. But as far as I know, he's never had an IT job. So like first order business, get an IT job, work help desk, work your way up, and then say, this is fixing things sucks. I want to break things, and get into security.
It's far more fun.
So that is my first question. I hope this kind of answers the kind of answer you're looking for, because those are the ones I give.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, obviously, you referenced the 10 years at Rapid7 thing, and yeah, it's a decent time to be at the company. I mean, firstly, I'd like to come on to the market kind of context and how that's shifted. But I mean, how has the business changed in that time? And I guess, has that followed how the market has evolved in terms of cybersecurity and threat landscape and things like that? Or
So yeah, during the time I've been Rapid7, I've had 3 or 4 jobs, I'd say total, distinct jobs with distinct different bosses and things like that. But over that time, like Rapid7 has grown from, about a 200-person company that had essentially two products, which at the time was Nexpose, which is now Insight VMs, the vulnerability management product, and Metasploit, Metasploit Pro, like the commercial version of Metasploit, and incidentally, like managing the open source project too.
Sure.
They had some like real light assessment work at the time 10 years ago, but now we have like a full-blown pen testing out organization that's really good. Like we do a bunch. We do hundreds and hundreds of pen tests in a year. And we employ, I don't know, 20-ish or so penetration testers that are at like max capacity all the time.
Yeah.
And we run another giant offering we have now is incident detection and response, which we hadn't had before. And so like that's a big deal. Like it is the value proposition there is it's not if but when you get compromised. So how are you going to deal with that? And so it's all detection, and there's like an endpoint solution, which was like unheard of 10 years ago. It's like, no, we all hate endpoint. That's AV. AV is garbage. It's like, turns out when you make an EDR, AV gets less garbagey, especially when you're smart about it. And like, we don't do like the AV, the classic AV traps, right? It's like, we'll just throw hashes at it and see what happens. So yeah, we have a pretty large, both automated incident detection and response, and then we also have managed detection and response. So it's like IDR versus MDR. These are acronyms we use a lot and sometimes interchangeably. MDR is like you call the bat phone, basically. You're like, oh no, I just got owned. What do I do now? We offer like crisis comms for companies. Right. Like if you've gotten owned, like how do you deal with the press? We do. Me particular, I do a lot of coordinated vulnerability disclosure work. So that means like if we discover a vulnerability somewhere in Rapid7 against some other software, like I'll run that ball down the field. If people out in the world discover vulnerabilities, they don't know what to do, like maybe they're not comfortable with a bug bounty, or they discovered it on the job, but they don't want to they want to be anonymous or something like that. Like I will help them, get that bug fixed and published and all that. So, and that's like a free thing. Like I don't charge anybody for this. I'm not charged, like because I have this background in open source. Like my first instinct is just publish it all. Who cares? I get paid the same either way. It doesn't matter to me.
That doesn't apply to everything that you own and do.
Actually, pretty much. So like we produce, unique research. We produce things coming from a couple projects, Project Sonar and Project Heisenberg. Sonar in particular is a project where we scan the whole internet and we tell you what we find. And that tell you what we find is the hard part, because like counting things is hard, turns out. Like if you take any kind of number theory class, you will learn this immediately. It's like, oh wow, it turns out counting things is really hard. But we published all of that for free at opendata.rapid7.com. If you go to that website, you can sign up and like get like pretty raw Sonar feeds there if you want. So like this is an example of Rapid7's like commitment to open source and open science and open data, right? Like we feel like the world is a better place if, which is such a trite thing to say, but we do really believe it. It's in our DNA where if we give this stuff out for free, even if it's like to competitors or whomever, or just strangers, whatever, we make sure you're not a criminal by like basically asking. Give
me everything.
And we'll vet like who you are. It's like we'll do like a very light touch, kind of like, are you sure that you're not a criminal? But like we will give it out, and we know like good things happen at that point. Like it's a very kind of it's like a Wikimedia sort of notion of just opening everything up. So,
but is that unique, or is that relatively unique in the market? Do other companies, obviously you mentioned it obviously as a bit of a kind of ethos. I mean, is that something that's pretty unique to Rapid7? Would you say, or?
I think that every security company that's worth talking about has some kind of like research and lab function. How much they share can be super varied. Like some companies will do like vulnerability research and they'll present at Black Hat, but they won't like release code. They'll show videos and they'll talk around it, but they're not going to give you the code. Because that either that's secret sauce or it's too dangerous for the people to handle. Like you can't handle the pod. But we give out proof of concept in the form of Metasploit, right? So I think that is specifically unusual, and I don't know of any. I won't say that. I know of a couple, but very few companies have an open source footprint like Rapid7 does,
Okay.
through Metasploit, through Meterpreter, which is it's kind of a component of Metasploit, but Meterpreter is basically the kind of rootkit payload that Metasploit defaults to, but it's got like a ton of features, and it was really cool. Actually, I can talk about Meterpreter for just by itself for an hour, but that was developed by hackers and also like game programmers, game designers, people who do ports
cool.
for Windows games.
Yeah,
Because you have to be like elbows deep in the kernel for that stuff to even work. And so like so many good kernel tricks are in there that like for like video game optimization turns out is a straight shot to rootkits. So that was really fun. But we do that. We work on a project now. My favorite Rapid7, forgotten middle child of open source is a project we have called Recog, which is a library of fingerprints, basically, and some struts around it to make it work. But the main thing about it is this giant library of fingerprints of devices. And so like you're familiar with Nmap, I'm sure. Nmap is pretty good at like discovering like what a service is, like a given service, and then it makes some guesses about like, oh, what version is it, and it does some other things. Recog is a crowdsourced implementation of like, oh, you have like a smart TV, what's that look like, and like you can describe it in this XML format. It's a bummer that it's XML, but it is what it is. And it's mainly it's XML so other things can consume it. But again, it's like it's another one of these things where it's like too close BSD, anyone can use it for literally anything other than crime, and people can run around it. So
cool. I mean, obviously, the threat reports is the big piece of work we've been looking at, and I've just produced something on it. I mean, I guess before we kind of delve into some of the findings in that report and the research that you've been working on for that, I was interested in, and again, this is probably a subject you could talk on for some while, but against the kind of context of your career at Rapid7, those 10 years, and you talked about the evolving proposition of the company. I mean, how has the threat landscape changed? Perhaps you want to look more recently. I guess this is kind of a context question, but what do you see as main kind of trends as driving threat and risk for organizations, and how has that changed or evolved as, I guess, greater adoption of technology and different technologies by organizations and so on?
So I'd say like the biggest change, like the most significant change of the last, I'd say the window of like 5 to 10 years is just shoveling everything into the cloud, right? Like, and having like really good, really excellent infrastructure provided by Microsoft, by Amazon, by Google. And these are outfits that know how security works, and like they do security by default most of the time. Well, we can talk about that, but it's just so much better than just like running your own racks of servers, right? Like you suck at this, like everyone is awful at this, and so like, and if it's not your business, then you are doubly bad at it. If your job, like my job used to be like selling computers on the internet, security is important, but security is job 4. And so like that changes things about the your kinds of threats. Like people need to worry about like their Docker containers and their Kubernetes and like all these other like technologies that they existed 10 years ago, nobody knew them. Like so it was like it's that kind of notion of open S3 buckets is a big deal on AWS, where like people still configure their S3 buckets in a naive way, with like global read, sometimes global write, because it just works, right? Because it's not their business. Their business is not security. They're like, oh, it's Amazon, everything's fine, and then not realizing that they're shooting themselves in the foot in the development process. And so like that I'd say is the biggest change. But like other than that, honestly, like the old threats of like phishing email is here, right? Like that is the number one threat. If you can like solve phishing, you solve 90% of your problems for sure. The secret is no one solved phishing. Network segmentation is a big deal. Like you get some notion of network segmentation for free with all this cloud stuff, because like, oh, it's not it's literally not on premises. It's Google's problem. It's a different IP space. You can't, even if you owned everything in my like cloud environment, you don't get a shot at my desktops, you know,
Sure.
like,
Okay.
and I don't get a shot at and you don't get a shot at that from my desktops most of the time. Like unless you get lucky and you hit a developer or something like that, but who has stored keys and they're doing it wrong. But anyway, you have to get really lucky in order to like bridge that gap. Other than that, though, network segmentation is not great in the enterprise. Like everything is a big flat network, and it is really hard to get people to change that. I'm worried today due to the unpleasantness about what that looks like for work at home, because like if work at home is suddenly you have to work at home, suddenly you have a whole bunch of new VPN traffic you've never had before, your number one goal is to get it to work to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a recipe for security failure, and I'm curious to see how this works, how this all plays out in a very, I don't know, dejected sort of pessimism version of curiosity. But like, I mean, because people like enterprises were they're sizing their work from home workforce as 5% or 10% of the time, and like sizing appropriately for that. And the occasional, working at home because like the kids are off school for like a bank holiday, but not like a company holiday, right? That changed, right? Now it's 100%. You have 100% utilization now, instantaneously. And I do think that I am very much looking at. We're working on a report now that we'll publish in June-ish,
awesome.
that looks at kind of like, it's a report we do now every other year. It's basically like an atlas view of the internet, and we break it out by country and all this other stuff. But anyway, we're in a position to be able to like kind of track like before and after COVID-19, because we have data on it, and we can say like, oh, did the world like how did the internet change between February and May? Like what does that look like?
Wow.
And that's the kind of question that like really excites me, right? Like that is a great question, and it's a great question to answer in public. We don't gate this report at all. I don't think we even take sales leads off it. We use it in like marketing materials, but we don't have like a give us your email and we'll spam you forever with our flares before you can read this report. So
how do you think it will change?
I mean, I don't have data, so I don't know. But that said, I do expect, I think the confluence of phishing being the number one threat, the lack of network segmentation, and suddenly everyone has a straight shot to their internal network over VPN is that's worrisome. That's worrisome. I know that there's a ton of scam activity out there that is around COVID-19 of like, click here to collect your welfare check, or click here to there's a contact tracing, there's a fake contact tracing scam going around right now where it like texts you and emails you of, oh, click here to see who in your area has already been infected. Like this is super compelling. The payload is a matter of imagination at that point. Like you can run whatever you want. And the fact that everyone is VPNing and they're probably not, let me back up a little bit. So in VPN, you have this notion of split tunneling that I don't know if you're familiar with at all.
I don't know. No.
So it's like split tunneling is basically like some traffic goes to work and some traffic goes to the internet, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So it's really handy for things like I have 2 Gmail profiles, say, right, or 2 Google profiles. I have my personal Gmail and then I have my work Gmail, and like they go different places. So that's like one kind of application notion of it. But in networking, like there may be resources that are accessible to me that are internal to the network, but I can also hit the whole internet just like from my house, and that's split tunneling. Sure. This is a disaster for things like instant detection and response because I don't get to see like all your outbound traffic, basically.
Right.
Like, I used to control that, right? As a network operator, I used to be able to control it. I would have my proxies, I would have all my detection gear on the network, and now I don't see that anymore because I have implemented split tunneling by accident. And so like one thing that companies should be doing right now, honestly, like now that we've gotten through like the initial panic, companies really need to like measure how their VPN traffic looks. Are they split tunneling by accident? Because it's almost always the default. or are they collecting all their traffic and actually shunt it? Like when I have my VPN client running, everything that comes from my computer should be going through my data center out my routers, right? At work, and it shouldn't be like just popping out over my residential ISP. So that'll be interesting to measure, to see like what that traffic really looks like, because we can see some of those changes now, because we also run a bunch of honeypots on the internet. And so we see a bunch of like attack traffic, and very tentatively it's looking like we're seeing more unique sources, and I think this is because of this, is that people are getting owned through some mechanism and then turning around and scanning everything like their computers are. But they're scanning it from like residential ISPs, where we used to see them like concentrated in like corporate ISP land.
But I mean, this is going to be a permanent thing for companies and enterprises to fix, right? Because most people, I know it's kind of speculative, but they're saying this is going to be a real shift, to remote working, a more digital kind of workspace. So
I do think that like March 2020 will be the new eternal September. So it is like a fundamental change of how the internet functions and how people interact with the internet. Because like if it turns out this whole time that like 20% of all of your knowledge workers in the world could actually do their job from home, why aren't you doing it already, right? Like it's so much cheaper. Like I don't have to drive anywhere. You can like trick me into working 16-hour days, like no sweat. Like it's not. There is tons of upside. You don't have to pay for real estate. Like I mean, now sucks for real estate market, but sucks for the notion of a city. But it does. I do think that you're right, that this is a fundamental shift. Like, and we're looking at a year of like sheltering, basically, like in that notion, like these politicians will politics, right? But there's no way this is going to be normal before the end of the year.
No way. I would absolutely agree. I mean, if we just bring it onto the threat report, obviously I digested it, writing a brief summary. I will admit I am a layman with a lot of the terminology used.
Well, we do write it for kind of a broader audience. We're not writing specifically for security practitioners. We try to hit it,
so it's a broader audience.
I will take criticism because we do want to. Be at least accessible.
No. So my piece was written for a broader audience. I understood the narrative. Sure. It's just obviously there's some pretty specific kind of terminology in there. I'm hoping that's what we can talk through. I mean, I guess I don't know how we want to do it if we work through each of the sections, maybe, but perhaps a sort of starter for 10. You could summarize the kind of core findings, so I can have them from you. And I guess particularly interesting if anything kind of jumped out at you as something that maybe you weren't expecting, or there was something new highlighted in the report that perhaps differentiates from previous ones or anything like that.
Sure. So the data, so the period covered ends at December 31st, 2019. So super sure how great this is going to be going forward.
A lot has changed since then.
I do think there are still some fundamentals in there, right? Like, that companies are, for example, like one of the biggest findings we found, which is not surprising. Boy, a lot of this report is just like, and that's what we thought was going to happen. But a lot of the things we found were things like companies are continuing to, build and deploy just like straight up vulnerable systems and putting them on the internet. And so these are things like Windows machines with SMB exposed. SMB stands for server message block. Nobody calls it that. But it's the Windows kind of everything protocol. It's file sharing, it's administration, it's authorization, it's printing, it's everything. And that is exposed on the internet, like to a pretty huge degree, which is shocking to me. I mean, security people are pessimistic kind of by nature, but it is surprising to me that the volume is still as high as we see. So like, and we know that attackers are into this because we see the attack traffic, hitting our honeypot. So we see like attacks using the Eternal Blue exploit payload that was released 3 years ago and was probably the most talked about security event ever. Because it hit, it was responsible for WannaCry, it was responsible for NotPetya, it was like the most costly cyber attack in the history of everything, according to the White House anyway. And which one of the few things they say that's true. And, it absolutely was. Like it knocked major companies offline for
Sure.
a while. It like absolutely killed people when like NIH hospitals were taken offline, right? So like it was a big deal, and in major media, it was on nightly news, it was on TV. Everybody, like even non-security people, knew about it, and it's still a problem. Like we still see this, and it's like, guys, come on, what can we do with this? Like this has kind of spurred us for this year too, especially this year, is that we're going to be working more on seeing what we can do to like just knock SMB as a protocol off the internet. Like, and it's from Microsoft. Microsoft says, do not expose this to the internet. Like this is, Microsoft is on board with this. So I'm not like dissing on Microsoft in this year.
Sure.
They used to pretend that it was okay for the internet. It is not okay for the internet at all. Like even if you are like super patch or SMB3, you've got all your key side, you've got all the cool stuff, right? You're as secure as you possibly can be. It's still not good for the internet. Because you're one ODay away, and we know that SMB is like ridiculously complicated. Nobody really understands it, and that is like literally true. And we learned this when the EU wanted to like wanted Microsoft to hand over the source code to SMB, and they're like, sorry, we don't have it. And and it's like, okay, I guess that's cool. There are competing specs for it that are always a source of bugs. Like the interface between like Samba and Windows machines is always like real sketchy, and this like just tells you that there's something creepy going on in there. And so like that was like for me, that was like probably the most visceral reaction I had to the data that we had for the threat report. Is like, come on, guys, like we have graphs on of like the unique sources of Eternal Blue, and we have like graphs on how much SMB we found and what versions they are, and like vulnerable versions, like literally hundreds of thousands of vulnerable versions of this thing that are almost certainly already owned, by the way. Like it's impossible that they can't be at this point. And they're just chugging along, like doing crypto mining and just kind of hanging. So
why maybe that's the $1 million question, but why is that still the case? What are enterprises
it's by default
doing or not doing, or
it's legacy? So it's legacy applications that require Windows 7 for starters, right? Like Windows 7 went end of life in January, and now that's a little bit loaded because Microsoft will occasionally still release patches for end of life stuff if you really twist their arm on it, or if there's like a major event. But it is predicated on a disaster first and foremost. Without a disaster, all your low and slow like APT style actors can just pop these things all day long. There's just no and without fear of any patch stopping them, no one's going to be detecting them, because the kinds of people that the kinds of enterprises that deploy SMB on the internet by accident are probably not the kind that also have like robust security, solutions.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's bad news kind of all around, and plus you have like these knock-on like tragedy of the commons effects of like, okay, well now I have hundreds of thousands of vulnerable machines. What happens when someone weaponizes them? Like, we don't know, because we do know. We have lots of examples. It's called Mirai, and, which took out like Twitter, by accident. So like that for me, that was like the most. Not so much. I guess it was surprising. It was surprising that the population of SMB machines didn't keep trending down. Like we lost some during WannaCry, and we're seeing it, and then it just kind of flattened out. Like the curve flattened out at the end at still a very high number, so in the millions. And so that's not no bueno.
So I mean, how does that kind of impact? Obviously, the threat report is as useful for you guys as everyone else that reads it. I mean, how do the findings kind of impact how you assess, reassess, evolve the proposition, so that you're making sure that you're helping these enterprises? I mean, what specific kind of services or products are addressing these kind of issues?
Well, for us, we'll take this data and so that we know, right? It's like, okay, SMB is a big bad deal. Any company that we are starting at as like, okay, you want to sign up for incident detection and response? Cool. What's your SMB look like? Is it accessible from the internet? Because like you're gonna have to fix that first. Like you have to be this tall to ride the Rapid7 train.
Do this before we do anything. Yeah.
And so And so that's kind of that, we'll have scoping calls like for pen testing like this too. Like we will get on pen testing engagements and say like, okay, well, we did do a light scan already from like open source data of your stuff, and you have this stuff open. You don't want to hire a pen tester to just find this again. Like that's that's an expensive way to do asset management, is have pen testers find it for you. So like we will talk people out of like buying pen testing services based on this.
Okay.
And so like, and then they'll go off and hopefully they'll fix their thing, or they'll go to some, crappy pen test shop and get their checkbox for compliance. But that's not the kind of business we're in. So, so that informs kind of like how we, how we approach our customer base. So it's things like that. And it's not just SMB, obviously. Like I talk a lot about SMB because I think it's a kind of major problem. But there are other things like Telnet and FTP, for example, like old-timey internet protocols that, had their place, but they were written and deployed in a time before encryption, like before like people knew about encryption, obviously, but like devices didn't have the oomph to do like all the, crypto things that you needed it to do. Like encryption is often pointed at as like, oh, well, that will slow your thing down because you got to do all this extra stuff.
Sure.
We see today that like, computers are faster and storage is deeper and bandwidth is wider. So like we can do encryption just kind of as a matter of course. But that's another hobby horse I get on a lot of like, well, don't expose Telnet to the internet. Like, yes, I understand. It's an internet technology. It's also was written in 1979. So like we can do better now, guys.
One of the sections I was interested to kind of find a little bit more out about was the focus on the security programs. So presented as a new section, I believe, of the report. So pulling in that user experience. Could you kind of expand on that?
Sure.
And I guess tell me about some of those findings. Yeah.
I think you're talking about like attack framework kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, like we are big fans of attack framework. Don't ask me what it stands for. It stands for
if you can't tell me, I can't tell you.
Yeah. Let me think. No, I got it. Adversary tactics, techniques, and common something that begins with a K. Common something. I don't know what it is.
You pass. That's fine.
Yeah, close enough. I got 80%. Solid B. But yeah, attack framework lets us really communicate, things, what attackers are doing in your environment in a way that is like, for one, standardized. It's very rapidly becoming universal. Attack framework came from the MITRE company, which is a sort of U.S. government, sort of private think tank kind of thing. They also invented, incidentally, CVE. So like all the CVE numbers you see associated with vulnerabilities.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
People hate CVE. People love attack framework. And it's like attack is like the memeiest security thing they've ever produced because people are bonkers about it. Every security person loves it. I have yet to meet someone who say like attack framework kind of sucks. Like I've never met anyone who says that. But you'll hear this about CVE all the time, by the way. Like CVE is garbage. Like it's awful and it's not even representative of vulnerabilities. But that aside, by the way, I'm on the CVE board, so I can talk trash about CVE.
I was wondering.
Yeah. But yeah, people hate it. But like attack is great because like it really lets you like kind of lay out, so like what's all the preconditions for an event, like what do attackers do to move from like compromise to privilege escalation to lateral movement to payload execution to exfiltration of data. Like it really just like lays it out in a very intuitive way that just like really it clicks with people. And so we have moved basically all of our detection and response to kind of fit into the attack framework so we can describe things like how often do we catch attackers and at what stage of the attack. Like it's one thing to say like, we caught an incident. It's another to say like we caught an incident and we're positive that this was like a precursor to a real attack. So like we can say it's like, and we solved a whole bunch of problems that didn't happen by solving it early on in the chain. And so it's always about like moving all your detections to the left, before they have a chance to like do bad things. Like, and it's great like if you catch people on the exfil stage, like if people are exfiltrating data from your company, you have big problems, but at least you caught them then.
Mm.
And it gives you an idea of like where to go backwards. But yeah,
Yeah.
you want to hit it early on, obviously. You know, and Rapid7 MDR at least, they're pretty good at this. The finding from the report was we hit about 90% of incidents we are catching in that early stage.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And I did not believe. I thought our like instrumentation was broken. It's like there's no way we're that good. But we looked and we're like, nope, it actually is true. It's like holy macaroni, like that is, you know, I don't want to turn the threat report into like a big like pat yourself on the back kind of thing, but you guys get a pat on the back. Like you're pretty good at this. So I was
much
very
higher
surprised.
than that? So how much higher is that than what were you expecting then? I mean,
I would expect
for my context, yeah.
I would expect a mature security organizations that has like good detection. I would expect in the neighborhood of like 50-50, like as a baseline. I would expect like 50% of like that very early kind of like initial touch, and then 50% everywhere else, right? Sure. The fact that they hit 90% is shocking to me. And I say that like as a former pen tester and as a developer on Metasploit. It's like, oh man, you guys would catch me like instantly. Like that sucks. As an attacker, this is awful news.
Yeah, sorry, lost the line there. I wanted to ask about financial services, fintechs, and the kind of evolution in that sector. It's a sector that I work across, particularly for one of our publications, and obviously this article will appear in that kind of segment as well. So it's always an interesting one for me. I mean, again, as brief or as lengthy as you want, but what's your sort of take on how that as a sector, the specific threats facing kind of fintechs, financial services? I mean, obviously you've got this big migration to us all banking with our mobiles and spreading everything out. I mean, I assume there's quite a broad threat landscape in that sector.
So yeah, financials are a favorite target, you know, because that's why do you rob banks? That's where the money is.
Yeah.
You know, so like there's plenty of like phishing activity around there, around the endpoints. You know, that said though, I do think so in our reporting in finance, hey, remember when I said like we catch them like 90% of the time? In fintech, we hit them at that about 0.5%. So like that initial access, we are down in the like 50% range, which is not bad. You know, because the first two totals up to what is it, about 87% of the time. So we'll hit you on we'll catch bad guys on initial access and on the execution phase, which is pretty good. We don't tend to see them really anywhere else. Like there's a couple of like bumps along the attack framework of like we'll see them when they're trying to be too clever. So we'll catch like evasions rather than the attack itself occasionally. Which is interesting. Like that's again, like I mean, if you're a criminal, stop reading now. Don't read our threat report to find out like where you can do better. But like honestly, like I've worked at a IPS company, so we were intrusion protection systems. This is like an inline device that sat on your network and like picked out, you know, attacker behavior. This is before like there was a lot of encryption everywhere. And one of the tricks we did a lot, I wrote signatures for this thing, and one of the tricks we did a lot was like we want to pick out the evasion rather than the attack, because like we'll see like obfuscated JavaScript that doesn't look like normal JavaScript, even like minified stuff. We'll see attacker specific, you know, tropes that we see just kind of come up over and over again, and things like in you know, in like cross-site scripting attacks and things like that, right? Like we'd see this come up that you never see anywhere other than malicious behavior. So that's the kind of thing that is, right? Like we're catching, we're catching the, you know, the way they're like I said, they're being too clever, and we catch the cleverness. So we see that in fintech specifically more than most. Which tells me too that there are probably really good, like there are decent endpoint detection going on. There's like, especially when you're talking about like credit issuers and like kind of larger banks where they have pretty excellent AI, right? They have good machine learning, and they know how people buy things, and they can kind of detect fraud as it happens, and they'll do that in their whole fraud detection section,
sure.
which is not technically information security, but it's like a kissing cousin to that.
Yeah.
I would love to see more in the way of marrying those disciplines. Like I would love to see more like banks talk at like Black Hat, you know, for example, or like present papers and those kind of forums are like, this is how we do this. Because it's always kind of like, that's like, if you think security is impenetrable, holy macaroni. Like if you look at like how finance does its thing, it's like, it is voodoo, like according to everyone. And so it's, so that tells me anyway that attackers are forced into this evolution, which then gets you another opportunity to detect them. So that's basically the takeaway on fintech. Like the thing that worries me about the financial sector, like as a defensible kind of IT infrastructure, is all of the custom code they have. So there's two things that go on there. One, they have a ton of custom applications that just don't see no one. It is nearly impossible to like get a trial copy, right, of like the internal software used in a bank to test it for bugs. And like, how do I, okay, well, let's say I do compromise something. How do I use this to like do privilege escalation? So like you don't get the visibility that you get in something like Windows or something like very common, right? So that's a problem, and that's a problem that industry has to solve. They need to hire, it's security people are scarce, but hey, everyone's losing their job now. So maybe banks have an opportunity to hire some code editors, and that would be great because you got to get the hackers paid. Always want to pay the hackers. That's first and foremost.
Keep them on your side.
And so I think that's one area that bothers me. The other is people who work in this industry. As we say, like phishing is like the number one threat. This is especially true in finance because people who work in finance are constantly opening Excel spreadsheets that are emailed to them. Constantly. It is like all they do. It is like 80% of their job. And every time their mail client yells at them, do you want to execute these macros? And you're like, yes, God damn it, this is my job. And it is my job to see how these macros go. That presents a very unique challenge for phishing because I can't say things like don't open attachments because guess what? That's why I'm paid to do the thing I do. So that's really hard. That's really hard to do. The silver lining on that is like, if you're in this mode of like, yes, I open attachments all the time, I open Word docs and Excel sheets all the time, they're running macros all the time. If any of those are like executing PowerShell as like the thing that the macro does, that that's a bad guy. Like there is, as far as we know, there's no one in finance that uses Excel that also uses PowerShell, which is a way to interact with the operating system. To do their job. There is, as far as we know, there is no legitimate need for that. And so we just have rules in our endpoints. It's like, if you ever see PowerShell as a child process of Excel, just kill it. Just kill it immediately. So that gives us a little bit of a trick.
Do you think that, I mean, particularly when I talk to others in financial services sector, and again, this may apply to kind of all enterprise sectors and industries, is there a distinct kind of difference between, I guess, what you would call incumbent or legacy institutions as opposed to kind of more startup, newer players to the market in terms of how prepared they are for threat and how they're tackling their security?
So like large finance, so like established financial institutions, got that way over decades, and that implies like a decade's worth of legacy. That is kind of floating around their network of like, well, I don't know really how this thing works. The guy who wrote it doesn't work here anymore. It's an access database. Sorry. I mean, it worked at the time, and there's nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. So you find that a lot in these networks, and that's more in the realm of penetration testing than just like sniping from the internet. Like that would be most of the threats we see don't care about you. Like they don't care about like your industry. They're not targeting you in particular. When you're dealing with folks who are targeting finance specifically, they are in a much better position, right? Like they have, I don't want to say they have the upper hand when it comes to like attack and defense, but they're in a much better position because they will know things about your, the kind of stuff that you run in your IT network that is unique to finance that you don't find in like retail or you don't find in manufacturing or whatever. So they will be tailoring their attack. So it feels like these guys know everything about you when they really only know like one thing about you. And so that's the kind of thing to look for. Like if you're running IT security out of these kind of organizations, is like, well, what makes me unique? So I can spend some time on that, knowing that most of the attacks are not unique to me. Most of the attacks only care that I'm running Windows and I have Cisco routers, right? Because that's everyone. You know, and you know, as we change the way we work today, like, you know, for a long time, like I have been a champion for, as a pen tester, I have been trying to get like the CFO's home router in scope forever for pen testing. I think now is the time I can do that. And so yeah, like your crappy home router, like Linksys, Link or Belkin or whatever, or the one that like BT gives you, or the one, you know, like your ISP's like router that you've probably never even looked at. I think suddenly that's a really good target, especially if you're going after fintech. When you know your executive suite is at home all of the time.
I mean, yeah, that's a really good thought, isn't it? You think the potential changes that could be necessary to facilitate, you know, a true kind of working from home lifestyle and business.
Yep. And it's like, you can have all the VPN in the world. If I can own your edge router at your house, I own you. Like that is kind of game over at that point. And it's like, the timing is a little unfortunate because just this last summer at Black Hat, there's a researcher. His name is Orange Sai. Look him up. He's freaking amazing. TSAI is his last name. Cool. First name Orange, like the color. He released a whole bunch of research on like the state of VPNs. He dropped like 12 bugs or something on like a whole bunch of VPN gear.
Right.
And they're still having a bad time with that. So like, that on top of now everyone's on VPN, that is the recipe right there. So like, I don't know how it's going in the world. I don't even know how much like criminals even care about like bleeding edge security research when phishing just works. But it's something to look at. So,
I mean, I guess I was going to try and kind of summarize some of those threats in the report and some of that data in the report, and try and distill it down to some sort of key recommendations, whether there's any things that, you know, enterprises absolutely should be doing from day one. Granted, the data kind of finished at the end of last year, and we've admitted that there's been a pretty significant change since then. But I mean, off the back of the threat report, and you can bring in some of the more recent stuff if you want. I mean, what are really the core things that enterprises just have to be doing to get this better and to get it right?
So I think that if you're truly an enterprise operation, right? Like you have more than one security person, you need to be adopting attack framework like right away. Like you need to be describing everything you do in terms of attack framework, because it just makes everything so much easier. It makes it easier to like convince your boss to like buy you gear that you want, right? So like this is absolutely in your interest as an employee to get familiar with this, and it's fun and people talk about it and it's great. It's a good community and everything too, and it's open. It's open source. So it's great. So like that's a great way to get yourself like out of kind of vendor lockdown and being able to like, you know, apples to apples compare across lots of vendors. Like I think Rapid7 is great, but maybe you don't. So like this is a way for you to determine like attack framework gives you a common language, you know. So get on the stick with that, and it'll make your life way better. Things like you know, instrumenting, you know, having some kind of endpoint detection that does instrument things like Windows PowerShell and Windows administrative tools gets you a long way towards you know, detecting that very early stage of like just after compromise, but right before anything bad happens. Like that gives you a really good view into that. Like I say, there's no reason for PowerShell process to be the child of an Excel process. It's never legit. So it's something like that is really critical. And then finally, like scanning your enterprise network, especially today, you know, your IP space from the outside, just like having some kind of view into that. You can do it yourself with something like Nmap. You can do it yourself with something like a product I like a lot is Rumble. It's like Nmap, except Nmap is like really good at finding services. Rumble is good at finding things. So like Rumble's really good at like OS detection and patch levels, and it's basically an asset management tool that uses like cool hacker tricks. Really like it. We don't make it. It's not our product. It's another product. But they do use Recog, our open source library for fingerprinting. So cool. This is one reason why I like it. So yeah, scanning that from the outside. And if you don't want to do all the scanning, or you're like too busy or whatever, like don't worry, we're scanning you for you through Project Sonar. You can come swing by opendata.rapid7.com, or you can email us research@rapid7.com, and we will absolutely tell you what you look like from the outside.
Cool.
So do those 3 things. You are 80% of the way there.
Which is a good start. We're getting near the hour. Are we, Madison, are we hard stop at the hour, and Todd as well? I mean, I had a couple of product related questions. I think in hindsight, I can probably pick up that information from the site. Just going to kind of ask you to run through some products.
Person. So as you may have noticed, I am a terrible salesperson. So I'm probably not the best person to talk about our products.
No, that's cool. I mean, the website's pretty.
So.
Hey, it's pretty extensive on the site, and I think, you know, if I've got any questions like that, which are, I guess, a bit more kind of generic, we can always fire those over in an email and ask for some collateral on that. I mean, just kind of looking to wrap it up, and you know, appreciate we've probably touched on some of these points, particularly around the COVID-19 stuff and where we're going from here. I was intending to ask you a kind of predictions of threat landscape and risk evolution over the next year, couple of years, and so on. Obviously. Yeah, I mean, can you predict that yet? Or
things are probably going to be different. Like, I mean, we are in a very new space in terms of the internet. I think the internet is going to be shaping itself around like what humans do, obviously, because damn it, we're in control, right? So unless and until the internet becomes self-aware, like we're still going to be influencing it quite a bit. But that said, like the criminal activity is in phishing. Like that is having like a solid kind of user education system from your IT security people, like how to identify phishing and what to do when you identify it. Like it's pointless to say like click carefully on things, because like I don't know how to do that. But there are ways to get people like, you know, more sophisticated about like what looks weird. And what warrants a phone call. And by the way, people like phone calls because they don't have offices anymore and they love to talk to people. That's kind of a feature of humans. Like we kind of think it a lot. And so like you could even have a whole like phishing training exercise of like, I'm going to send you all a bunch of phishing email. I'm not going to tell you about it. You're going to notice, you're going to call somebody, you're going to call your buddy.
Yeah.
And your buddy is hopefully in the IT security department, but maybe not. Maybe your buddy is like, you know, your program manager who got extra special training or something like that. So like you can totally federate this stuff. And just have that like security culture in mind, so we don't fall for scams, because that's where the attackers live. You know, other than that, oh yeah, I almost forgot to say, yeah, you got to check your VPNs to see if you have split tunneling or not. You cannot, like, you're allowed to do split tunneling. Don't get me wrong, but you want to know that you're doing it on purpose, and you have to like that has to be an informed decision of like, okay, I am choosing not to see these indicators of compromise on the wire. Because you might not have the bandwidth. Like I said, like I work with MITRE a lot as part of my work on the CVE board, and they switched to an on-prem hosted version of Skype because they're government and they need that for like a bunch of top secret stuff.
Sure.
It was garbage for like the first 2 weeks. It was awful. It was like, oh, cool, we have 9,000 employees and they're all on Skype now. Wonderful. It's the worst ever. And so like I've been trying like just dragging them into like the brave new world of Zoom for like their not top secret stuff. You know, that's going okay. I think our next board meeting might be on Zoom, so hopefully.
Look, we can wrap it up soon. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I think one thing I that always comes across when you speak to others talking about this kind of stuff is that, you know, this evolution of the attacker, and you've got to stay one step ahead and so on. But I guess with phishing, you're talking about still being the primary form of attack. If that's so successful, do the attackers need to evolve? Are they still evolving? Are they still changing the way that they're attacking?
So like very sophisticated attackers who are targeting individual, like certain enterprises are better at this, right? Like, and we do know that we do see a ton of traffic around things like exploiting vulnerable applications on vulnerable operating systems that are exposed directly to the internet that have patches available but haven't been patched. That is a very long sentence to say, like, they're hitting the easy stuff. And so, like, that attack is harder than a phishing attack. It's more technically challenging. You do like, as a pen tester, like, I know that, like, if I do that, I've probably saved myself a lot of time. I'm not waiting on someone to click a thing that I email them. Like, it's a lot more efficient, right? As a bad guy to do it that way. And so that is a real threat, right? But that's not the threat that most people are in a position to even, like, defend against, right? Like, that's IT security's problem. That's not your problem. Your problem is your email box. And so that's why I, like, kind of bang on this phishing thing a lot, because that's the thing that people can do. It's the one. It's kind of the one area you do have power over. That, and, like, I don't know, password management. I could talk about password management for another hour. You don't want to hear about that. It's boring. But
our IT guy tells me about password management all the time. I'm grateful at it.
It's very good for you. It makes you impossible to fish, for starters. It's a really nice defense.
Look, Todd, that's really cool. I think we've kind of covered the main points I had. I mean, as you say, this is a subject that we could talk at in such detail. Is there anything specifically, I know we're kind of pitching this in line with some of the info in the report, is there anything specifically that we haven't really touched on that's important, or that you wanted to add in the context of that? From my perspective, if there's any more questions, I can always fire those over, but I don't want to leave if there's anything that we haven't really touched on.
I think we hit most things. We did have a mystery in the report that I still don't have a good answer to, but it's like, we have a graph in there about the kinds of malware we see in enterprises. And you might remember it's like a big V shape with like a lot of blue, right?
Yep.
Because most of the time we see, like, rootkits and Trojans and things like that, right? Just kind of, I've owned you and now I want to persist my access. That's the kind of thing that does. But then in June, we saw this, like, huge jump in cryptocurrency mining that we didn't see anywhere else, and we can't explain it. It's a mystery. I don't know. I don't know how much we can write about that, but, like, I still don't have a really good answer for it. I've got
any ideas? Or?
So, like, we looked at, like, the price of Monero and the price of Bitcoin and, like, the kind of activity around that. We didn't really, we didn't see anything there. We do know now that what is it? The Emotet malware family was at the time, last June, was going through, like, a development phase. And so, like, and it seems like they broke their Trojan. And so, like, we didn't see it anymore. And so that is now a contender of why that was, is that just like the malware gangs just, like, kind of busted their shit.
It just broke.
So, but that's, like, we don't see a ton of, like, causal information.
Sure.
But we do see now, like, Emotet is, like, they're coming back gangbusters. They're doing a lot of business these days, and being more interesting about their attacks. So yeah. I think Madison is texting me saying I'm soon.
I mean, she's jumped. Look, I don't want to take.
She's gone. We can really talk shit about that.
She's bailed. You went too deep into the subject. But yeah, hey, look, I think we've covered.
The question is, like, that's the only other thing, and I don't even know if that's even worth writing. But anyway,
I mean, I'm happy we've covered the main areas. Inevitably something always comes up when you're going through the info. If it does, I guess you're happy for me to fire a question over to Madison or something like that. But look, I'll let you crack on, let you get on your way, and it was really good to speak to you. I really appreciate it. Really interesting stuff. I look forward to speaking to you really soon. Okay.
All right. Have a great afternoon.
Stay safe. Take care.
All right. Wash your hands. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.